Streaming live via the internet, welcome to ISP Radio, your weekly source for ISP-related news, events, and interviews with industry experts. If you deliver internet via fiber optic, wireless, coax, or any other way, you're in the right place. Chat live with us weekly via ispradio.com every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Central Time. And now a brief word from our sponsors. Link Technologies, providing ISP consulting, support, and hardware for wireless ISPs. TowerCoverage.com, providing online RF coverage maps. Mimosa Networks, providing high-density, high-bandwidth radio products. Advanced LLC, providing retail and wholesale advanced communication services by matching providers with your bandwidth needs. And by Sitel, providing reliability in surge suppression. And now your host for ISP Radio, Steve Grabiel and Dennis Burgess.
Welcome to another edition of ISP Radio. I'm your host, Steve Grabiel, like the announcer said, and I've got Dennis Burgess, the co-host and also producer of the show. I'm currently broadcasting the show from the home office in Seal Beach, California, heading back to New Mexico on Saturday to put on my work clothes and get back to work. I've had a really fruitful adventure here in California, doing a lot of paperwork, been writing newsletters for my customers, letting them know what's going on in my business and how we're bettering their services. We got involved with Viasat. We had a show a while back with Dan Turek of Viasat about becoming a satellite dealer, and after being able to get a major project taken care of, I was able to settle in and do that training. I got through the technician's training portion of it, and that was time consuming, but I hammered through it, got it all done. Just have one more online webinar to attend to wrap that up for myself, and I got to get 2 more technicians up and running, and then we'll be able to start retailing Viasat or Exceed's internet in places that I don't reach. If you guys are interested in that, we have a show in our archive from Dan Turek with Viasat you might be interested in. What else have I been doing out here? Just like I said, writing newsletters, doing a lot of paperwork stuff that I can't get to when I'm in the mix of things back in New Mexico where my network is. And out here in California, it seems like everything out here is in excess. Yesterday we got an excessive amount of water, and it did a lot of damage to freeways and such from a nice soaking rainstorm that I'm sure is not uncommon for Dennis and Missouri. So, Dennis, with that being said, are you there?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So, tell us what's going on out in your neck of the woods, and I know we got some exciting news about at Wispalooza to announce, and I'll let you do it since you're the one that set it all up.
Yeah, not a problem. Well, we have been talking with the WISPA board. Obviously, I'm on the WISPA board as well, but after some discussion and things like that, we had basically we came up with a good idea that last year and several years prior, we have had a number of WISPs that cannot make the show, but they still want to know what's going on with WISPA. And every year, WISPA always puts up a little system, a little go-to-meeting that allows the president and other people to broadcast the State of WISPA event. And it looks like we're going to be able to take over that broadcast, and we're going to be streaming it live as the show is going on. So I'm really hopeful for that. See how that works out really well, or I hope it works out really well for everybody that is obviously going to be there, and for the people that are not. And, of course, that will be archived, so anybody that needs to look at it later on can. So,
that's
good stuff.
Good news, man. That's good news.
Oh, yeah. And we'll see how it all works out in the end. Like I said, we just don't know yet. It'll be a little bit, but we got all the software we need. We have everything we need, so hopefully it'll be a really, really good show. You know?
Yeah, and then we will also be broadcasting at our normal time there at Wispalooza, doing a show wrap-up, if you will, because Wednesday's kind of near the end.
Gotcha. Yep. I mean, that's the goal. We'll see how it all works out in the end. Like I said, we're still playing with everything, trying to get all of our software working, but I definitely think it's going to work out pretty well.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. So what's going on out in your neck of the woods? Tell us about the recent stuff going on with Link Technologies?
Well, Link Technologies, we're always growing. We definitely we just purchased a new office and warehouse. Hopefully, we're going to move to that in a few months here. And overall, just really, really keeping busy. We have a lot of WISPs out there that need a lot of help, and that's what Link Technologies does. I mean, we do everything from I know a lot of people think of us as a router company, and we do a lot of microtech, obviously, but we help with WISPs with path analysis, business questions, you name it. So we try to do a little bit of everything. We do some VoIP work, we do server work, we do a lot of hardware. So, everything from the box, the tower box, so that'd be the box on the tower itself, all the way to antennas, cabling, you name it. It's all on our website. You can order it online. We also have experts here that also can help you. I.e., you can give us a call and we can sit there and go, okay, hey, here's based on your recommendations or based on your information, here's what we can do for you. Here's the gear that we would recommend, that type of stuff. So lots and lots of abilities in there as well. So it's just really up to you on, what you want and what you need. You can visit us just online at linktex.net. And again, we have everything on there, everything from, Ubiquity, we do SAF, we do Cambium, we do all your little hardware, nuts and bolts, lag bolts, screws, again, like I said, cable, all that kind of stuff. So a lot of good stuff going on. We're also a master distributor for Telerad and Microtech as well. So, of course, you can get all that kind of gear as well. So lots of things going on. And we do a lot of municipal networks and Wi-Fi networks. One of the most recent projects that we've had is a few municipal networks, and then we also have another product called the HS Network Manager, which is that Hotspot Network Manager, which I know we talked about. We've been selling that quite well. We have a lot of hotspots where people come in and say, "Hey, I have this RV park, or I have these condos that I want to cover with Wi-Fi. What can we do to get that done?" You know what I'm saying? And we do quite a bit of that type of work as well. So, keeping busy, how's that?
Yeah, just like we all are.
Yeah.
I mean, even when you think there's nothing to do, there's always something that needs to be done.
Always something to do. Always something to do.
Yeah. So this week's show, we've got two gentlemen that have been on the show before. Don't know if Dennis has them queued up yet, but we've got Jack Lehman. He was on the show previously with Straight Path. His product is subleasing of frequency spectrum. And Dennis, do we have Jack with us?
Let me go ahead and get him here. I'm gonna cut over here. Let's see if we can give him a call.
Okay.
We're trying. We're calling.
Hi, this is Jack.
Hey, Jack. This is Dennis and Steve. Are you there?
I am here.
Excellent, man. Hey, we got you on ISP Radio. Thank you for coming
Great.
on.
Happy to be here.
Thanks for coming on the show, Jack. Like I was telling the audience before, we've had you on the show before talking about Straight Path and the subleasing of spectrum. You got some new news for us?
Yeah, actually, what's really nice is that CB&L, who's got this new point-to-multipoint in the license 28, actually started shipping already. And there are a number of carriers across the U.S., all the way from California, all the way into New York now, that have begun deploying it. And we're seeing, initially we're seeing some really decent success at it. We're getting up, I think they just came out with some statistics that at 4 nines of availability, they're actually going about 2.5 miles on a particular customer that has a sector with 8 customers sitting on it right now. So it's pretty sweet and pretty unique in that sense, specifically because it's licensed and they get away from that unlicensed noise. Now, one of the things that we had mentioned last time, which I think is always worthwhile mentioning, it really depends on the region or on the market that you're in. It's not for everyone. There are cases where it's going to make a lot more It's going to make a lot more sense for you to go with unlicensed. In some cases, you're going to want to go with. You're going to need to go 10 miles. You're going to need something that's really inexpensive because you have a customer paying you, $20, $60, $100 a month or something. But although this is pretty inexpensive, generally speaking, the ROI being nice, you're still not necessarily going to want to deploy this in areas which are a little bit more rural, but actually where you're going into the cities where there's going to be a lot more noise in the unlicensed, and the unlicensed, the higher end products won't work. And that's really where you see your return is in the scenarios where you have a lot of noise in the areas, and you have shorter distances where you're not looking to go about 10 miles, and where any place between 2 and 3 miles are really going to do it for you. So again, they've started deploying. We're seeing some initial really nice success. We're getting on an aggregate about 550 meg out of the links, and that's shared. So each customer unit, or what they're calling the remote terminal, the RT, is capable of handling up to the 550. So it's really a question of how you oversubscribe on your customer basis. So a nice product.
Gotcha. So question. So actually in?
Okay, it's in the 28 gigahertz band.
Okay.
So it's available nationwide. It is spotty. In a year from now, hopefully the 39 gig band, which is not spotty at all, will be available. But in the meantime, you have the 28, which is doing its thing. And it's by a company called cbnl.com, or Cambridge Broadband Networks Limited. It's available. You can get to them directly and talk to them about it.
Gotcha. Okay. So we got that. We got the basics information. Now you're saying CBNL, they're going to give you 550 meg aggregate at the access point. Would that be correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And with that, each CPE is capable of doing 550.
Correct.
Okay. And how many CPEs are they recommending per network?
Okay, so there are two ways of going about this. The initial, just using the all-outdoor unit with an indoor PoE, you're going to be able to get 8 customers on it. If you want to get more than 8 customers onto this, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to get this radio controller, which is also available directly from them. And with that, you'll get as many, in some cases more, depending on the activity in your network, you'll get about 30 customers off of that. So, from a cost perspective, from an infrastructure cost perspective, on a real estate side, New York City, out in San Francisco, areas like that where you're going to pay $200 or $250 per foot on a tower on a rooftop, you're going to save a whole lot of money coming off of a rooftop with a single antenna going to the individual customers.
Sure. So what we're looking at access points that are 550 meg. They start out with a limit of 8 CPEs, but can be upgraded to about 30 CPEs. And all the CPEs can get to 550. Obviously, your limit is your 550 aggregate at the access point at that point. Correct?
Correct.
Okay, great.
So you have to plan your oversubscription well, but it's a nice chunk that you're going to be able to feed out to the customer.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, it's not going to be, and I can even see this to be in some of these areas where you got, how can I put it, where you have many places where maybe you want to do, and you're only doing 2 miles though out, right?
There are a couple of cases where we have 2.5 miles built. It was actually tested out to 5. So you have to figure, your 4 nines, your clean 4 nines is going to be about 2.5 miles.
Okay. There you go. So that's really good information for those of you that need high bandwidth in a small space. In metro areas where you could put in cells every 2 miles, you're doing really good. In our area, like mine anyway, where some of our links are 13 miles, not so much. But you get a lot of bandwidth, and
right.
You can sublease that license pretty inexpensively as well.
A lot cheaper than running a cable for sure, 2 miles. You mentioned that this has been deployed with some success. Did you mention that it's mostly carriers that are getting involved with this?
It's actually all over the place. We have a couple of WISPs, we have ISPs, and we have some of the big mobile carriers that are testing it right now.
And this is a fixed wireless, correct?
This is fixed wireless, correct? In
So
a point, obviously a point-to-multipoint application.
right, and in this case, it wouldn't be the equipment from CB&L is not necessarily like LTE equipment.
It is not. No, it is microwave, or what we know is microwave.
It's
Sitting right now, again, it's 28 gig. You can use it for point-to-point or point-to-multipoint, and hopefully the 39 gig will be available in about a year.
And that's spectrum that you guys lease out, and you're saying that it's the manufacturers that are catching up to develop the 39 gig stuff?
Correct. Yeah. CB&L right now is in development of the 39.
There you go. So there you go. We have so that equipment is available. I know it's probably hard for you to sit there and say cost because I know you don't sell the gear typically. But is there any type of price point on a per access point and subscriber basis? Even if it's retail, that would be probably high that you could probably give us. That would be helpful because a lot of people are going to want to know how much is it to be able to do that.
Sure, right. Obviously, the best way to do it is giving a shout out to CB&L. What I can tell you is I'll give you the list prices. The access points run at about $5,000 on list, and the remote, what they call the RTs, the remote terminals, what we know as CPEs, those list at about $2,000. So, I guess it's going to be a volume purchase discounted, or depending on where you get it from.
Gotcha.
Right.
There you go. So lots of good information there. I hope that we get everybody together, and that's really a good solution for close line of sight, 2 mile stuff. So, Steve, do you have any other questions for Jack before we let him go here?
No, I appreciate Jack coming on and telling us about the equipment that's coming out and that, and we appreciate you being on the show and for following up on the conversation we had a couple weeks ago about Straight Path. Now remember, guys, Straight Path just leases out the spectrum, and obviously working with manufacturers to develop gear that will operate in that spectrum, and being as high frequency that it is, it does not go very far, but it can deliver high capacity. Is that correct, Jack?
That's exactly it. And from a distance perspective, I would put it into excuse me, I guess what I would call a medium category. But I think there are a lot of cases, a lot of those metro areas where there's really a nice application for it, and where when you sit down and you take a look at the return on investment, it really bodes nicely to the business model.
Right. So it's ideally focused in metropolitan areas.
Correct.
Yep.
Yes.
So there you go. Lots of really good information. Hey, Jack, before we get you off here, can you at least give us how can they get in contact with you? How can they get in contact with your website, etc., so that they can get with you on getting those licenses started?
Sure. The easiest way is Jack, J-A-C-K, at straightpath39.com. You can go straight to our website, send an email to info, and it'll get to me, and just give me your number, your contact information will get out to you. You can call me directly at 201-735-8752, and I'd be happy to help you.
There you go.
Jack, for ease for the listener here, you've mentioned a company, CB&L. Do you happen to have their website address? And Dennis,
Sure.
maybe could you post it on the chat?
Sure. cbnl.com, which Charlie Boy Network Larry.com, and all the information is up there.
Perfect.
Excellent. Jack, we're going to let you go. Thanks so much for being on the show at the last minute.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
You bet.
Have a great day.
Well, that was some good information on the Straight Path product of leasing space, it sounds like they've solidified into a manufacturer that can provide the gear. What say you, Dennis?
Oh yeah, I mean, keep this in mind. Street Path is the people who license the spectrum, and then the CBNL is the guys who actually do the radios in that particular space. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be careful on what you're saying there. You know, they do not make the radios at all, but they do plenty of other things. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So, it's not a big deal. I just wanted to make sure that we get everybody going on that. You know what I'm saying? And
Yeah,
it's good that we have,
especially knowing that there's a product out there in a clean environment.
exactly, and that's the nice thing. I mean, if you're in a area in which you have high bandwidth customers within 2 miles, you can't go wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we're lucky to have Jack to come on in short notice, and then we also have another gentleman who's no stranger to the show, Brett Glass with Lariat Internet, to talk about, I believe, it's third-party software on routers. Dennis, can we cue Brett up?
Yep. Let's see if we can add him to this call. Maybe. Speaking of which, Steve, we lost your video here.
Okay.
I'm actually gonna just call you right back here.
Okay.
Anyway, we're gonna get Brett on the call here shortly, and we're gonna have him talk about some of his new awesome stuff. Here we go. All right, Steve, you still there? Still with me?
Yeah, I'm back here.
Excellent. All right, we're going to see if Brett can come in here.
There, I see him.
Yeah, he's trying.
Hello.
Hey, there he is.
Yes, I'm here.
Hey, Brett. Hey, you said you have something that you said you some interesting stuff to talk about
Absolutely.
the FCC. What's going on, man?
Well, okay. This is something which involves the FCC and an NPRM that came out recently. It is, for those of you who know how to access the FCC site, ET docket number 15-170, and it has to do with the certification of Part 15 equipment, which concerns all ISPs who use wireless of any kind. It's important to us because while it does a lot of good things, there are a few provisions in this proposed rulemaking which could have some very negative impacts upon us, and I think it's important that people are aware of this. I think it's important that people who regularly file comments and organizations that regularly file comments with the FCC weigh in on behalf of ISPs, especially smaller ISPs, who might be impacted severely by it.
So what is it?
Well, the FCC for a long time has been very concerned about people putting third-party firmware into various RF devices that might modify their behavior in ways that interfered with things like TDWR, weather radar, and other such things. And as they're revising the rules for equipment certification, they're doing they're making some revisions which mainly have to do with the new designs of radios. The fact that some radios are now modular, that manufacturers tend to make a lot of small changes to their designs, and they don't want to go through the entire certification process. And all of that is good. A lot of what is in the NPRM that you'll see at that docket number is actually quite good. But because it's concerned about potential problems with interference, the FCC, as part of this NPRM, is proposing to basically ban the modification of the software inside an RF device by third parties, and force the manufacturers to put in safeguards against adding third-party firmware. This includes things like DDWRT, which is routinely used to replace the firmware in routers, especially when the model has been discontinued and the software for it is now insecure and out of date.
Okay. So, I mean, I understand the point of the FCC. They want to prevent people, especially novices, from putting firmware that would not normally be with that piece of hardware, thus possibly modifying the capabilities of the radios. Because most of these radios, like when we look at most of the radios that people have, that Ubiquity, you name it, these radios can operate typically outside of their spectrum in some cases, or the unlicensed spectrum, at least a little bit. And the big thing that they're wanting to prevent is, one, for TDWR to prevent a radio from operating in a band that it should not. Which makes, as you said, which makes total sense. But what is I guess the big fear for the FCC is, of course, TDWR. But what is the big fear, with the exception of some type of SOHO router that is no longer updated and is outmoded or is outmodeled? Other than that, is there's something else, especially as it pertains to the WISP industry very specifically? Is there something that the WISP industry that we have a problem with? You know, that what is this ruling going to affect, or how is it going to affect a wireless ISP operator? Maybe that would be a better question.
Well, it will affect us, Dennis. It will affect us in several ways. First of all, if a model of router has a security hole and the manufacturer doesn't close it, we may have no ability to close it. My ISP happened to be the first to discover a worm that infected Linksys routers. It was called the moon worm. That was about a little more than a year ago when we discovered this infecting our customers' routers and affecting their service. It took a very long time for Linksys, which had just been bought by Belkin, to close that security hole. In the meantime, if we had not been able to go in and make modifications to the customer's routers, they would have been chattering, basically taking down networks with the large amount of chatter that they generated when the worm tried to infect other routers. We were able to close the hole. In fact, we were able to give a lot of information back to the manufacturer and also to third-party security investigators, but we really would have had our hands tied if we weren't able to go in and modify the firmware. What we did was we took those routers, some of which were out of date and simply didn't have any new firmware for them, and we installed DDWRT on it. Now, DDWRT, as I'm sure you know, is a very popular third-party operating system. It's Linux-based, and it runs on a very wide variety of routers that are out there. Many of them, again, they've been abandoned by the manufacturer years ago. By doing this, we were able to close the security hole. We use DDWRT for other things too. For example, suppose a customer wants, that has a network that's working well, but simply doesn't reach all the way through their building. You can buy repeaters out there that do some of the functions that are necessary to extend it, but often you can't get the features that you need. So one of the things that our WISP does is we will come in and we will program a router, especially with DDWRT, and we will heavily customize that installation of DDWRT to become a repeater within a building, to become an access point with a built-in switch within the building, which is something that the customer frequently needs, but just isn't sold. You can't actually buy that product on the open market from a manufacturer. An access point plus a 5-port switch, but we can make one. And so we do a lot of good, and it would really impact us if we weren't able to offer this to our customers. So again, what we have is a situation where to use an analogy, the FCC is concerned that you might do something to your car that would make it unsafe, and so they are welding the hood shut. The same thing is really true here. There are a lot of good things that you might do with the hardware, but they're worried about one particular thing that you might do that was bad. And so they're banning any modifications at all. And this is something that we should comment on. There originally was a comment period which closed on September 8th, but the Consumer Electronics Association and a few other parties that wanted to comment were so concerned about this, they asked the FTC to extend the comment period and for a full month, so they could take more time to put in there to prepare their filings. And so the deadline for filings is now October 8th. And again, if you want to read what's already been submitted in the docket, you can go and do so in the electronic comment filing system. I strongly recommend that WISPs chime in on this one. Suppose you have a good practical example. Not only routers, but also older radios that are outdoor radios might be affected by this. For example, suppose you have to give one example of a model that's recently been orphaned, suppose you have a Ubiquiti Bullet radio, the original Bullet 2 or Bullet 2 HP. Those are being phased out. No new hardware is coming out for those, and they have a serious security flaw in them. The HTTPS, the way of controlling the radio using a secure web connection, uses SSL3, which is now deprecated. Many browsers won't even let you control the radio that way. The only way to update that radio is to go in and put third-party firmware in there. This would be basically if we could no longer do this, we couldn't update the radios. We couldn't close this security hole. And any updates that might turn out to be necessary, we could not do to that particular radio, which is very popular among WISPs. Every WISP I know just about is using that particular model or has used that particular model. So it's of concern to us, and we should definitely file comments asking that we be continued to allow to put new and better firmware into our own hardware.
So I'm going to be the devil's advocate here, because that's what we kind of do sometimes. While I understand where you're coming from, and I definitely do not like the analogy that you gave is very, very, very good. Definitely not a problem with that. My only thought was, why would we need to updating the software to fix a hole? I understand that. That makes total sense. But I would use that opportunity as a business consultant anyway. That, hey, we have hardware that is outmoded and outdated and no longer supported. It is old hardware. It is old standards. Why don't we just replace the hardware? It will be faster and cheaper to replace the hardware with something better, bigger, badder, better. On top of that, most of the time you're going to get better spectral efficiency out of that, and you're still using the, quote, stock software. I'm not sitting there saying that that's what you said is not true. I'm just coming up with that little excuse. What would your response be for something like that?
Okay, my response to that would be is that the hardware is not obsolete. In many cases, the routers that we're talking about modifying, including the Linksys routers, has been orphaned for reasons other than new technology. For example, they just decided, well, they could cost reduce it by going to a new model. A good example is the E1000 router, which is perfectly good 802.11n router. They cost reduced and went to a different case and redesigned it, and Linksys no longer sells that model. That was one of the ones that was affected by the worm, and one of the ones where we closed the hole by putting DTWRT in. It's a perfectly good router, and so there isn't always a technology difference there. Sometimes there are other reasons why manufacturers discontinue things. The other reason is just simple economics. WISPs have one of the things that WISPs have always done is made broadband affordable. And if we have to replace the equipment every time there's some sort of a problem like this, even though the old equipment works perfectly well for what we're doing, our service is not going to be as affordable. This ought to be of concern to the FCC, which is always talking about trying to stimulate broadband adoption. Making sure that the people aren't going to be deterred by the price, and so that's very important too. And finally, I guess one of the most important things here is that if someone is really determined to bypass the safeguards that the manufacturer would put in against flashing third-party firmware in, they can probably do it. You might not be able to, for example, to load in new firmware through the web interface, but if you know what you're doing, you could use the JTAG interface, and you could flash new firmware directly into it by opening the device up and modifying the flash chip directly. And so this is mainly going to lock honest people out. if someone is really, really determined, they're going to be able to bypass it anyway. And then the people who are going to know to try to do such a thing, suppose they're trying to use TDWR frequencies that they shouldn't be using, are exactly that sort of people. They're not people who are, who are going to give up just because there's a little bit of a lock on the door. So this will really only hurt the people who are trying to do good things. It's not going to hurt everybody else. So I think for all of those reasons, we really, we really should make sure that we have access to the hardware that we buy, and we're able to make common sense modifications. And then if someone does violate the rules, if somebody does broadcast on those frequencies, and we can determine that by monitoring it, we should come down on them very hard. I mean, WISPs were instrumental in discovering discovering who was interfering, for example, with the Las Vegas airport radar, and stepped in to help. I think we should do that and continue to do that. But again, I don't think that we should ban a tool just because there is one small way in which it can be used that might be detrimental.
I kind of agree with you, Brett, and it kind of goes back to Dennis, and we were talking a while back about Title II, and it's coming to us whether we like it or not. What did we say? It was the nuclear bomb option, when the FCC has proven themselves to be completely adequate at zeroing in on the bad players that do stuff. I think Brett's right. It's just more regulation and I love your analogy. You have an unsafe car, so let's weld the hood shut.
Yes. So anyway, again, if people are interested in this, the docket number is 15-170. You'll find a lot of one-page comments written by people who are supporters of just open-source software like DDWRT. But you'll also now there are other comments beginning to stream in from people who are people who are have more practical uses for things like upgraded firmware. I definitely think that organizations like WISPA should chime in on this one. We have about 5 weeks, 6 weeks now to do that, and I think that we should. And I think individual WISPs who have a story to tell should also file. I think it could make a big difference in the long run. It should also set a precedent. For the FCC. This docket is coming out of OET, which tends to be much more responsive to good technical arguments than some of the other more politically motivated bureaus in the FCC. I think we might get some results if we speak now.
Now, Brett, you mentioned that you rooted out a problem within a Linksys router, and I've got a few Linksys routers deployed out in the field that the customers buy and put on there. What was the worm exactly? I'd like to Google it. And what model of Linksys was that affecting?
It is called the Moon Worm, and you can find lots of documentation on it. If you just Google that, you'll find lots of information. It affected a wide range of Linksys routers. Mostly the early E-series routers. They're the ones whose models began with the letter E. But it also did affect some of the older WRT models. This is a worm which did not modify the firmware of the router, although it surely could have. It spread from router to router, and when the router was reset, it would lose the worm, but would quickly be reinfected by its peers, which kept on trying to reinfect it. It would get in through a hole in the web interface, and would essentially take the router over. And this worm, its main purpose, it looked like a proof of concept. The main thing it did was just spread, sort of like the original Morris worm, that one of the first internet worms. But it was a very strong proof of concept. It demonstrated that it was possible to do more with people's routers once it got in. And there are a couple of newer worms which are trying to do that. If you go out and again, if you Google just Linksys worm, you'll see that some people have reverse engineered this, or maybe the original creators have come out with another version. They're starting to do other things like build botnets out of people's home routers. It turned out that this one could be defeated in a couple of different ways, but the easiest way was simply to flash it with firmware that wasn't susceptible. After nearly 9 months, Belkin, which bought Linksys, finally came out with firmware that was hardened against this particular worm. but people have since found other exploits, other ways into Linksys routers. So the fact that they plug the hole for this one worm used does not mean that the routers are safe. We really need to be vigilant. We need to be able to install more secure operating systems on it. And DDWRT, they're very vigilant about security. I like, despite the fact that they're under a somewhat restricted license, I like their firmware a lot. And I think we should be able to continue to do that.
No, it makes sense to me.
Yeah, there you go. Good information.
But like Dennis says, it may behoove you just to replace the gear with newer stuff. But like you mentioned, Brett, everyone's price conscious. They're willing to spend $7,000 for a TV, but if they had to spend $1 for a router, they'd come unglued.
Yes, and what's more, if I call up a customer and I say, okay, you need to spend $40 on a new router, the router will say, wait a minute, you sold me this router. It's your fault, and you only sold this to me a year ago. Why should I have to replace that? I could lose the customer. I certainly would lose a lot of customer satisfaction if I had to do that, and all for nothing. When there's a perfectly reasonable patch that fixes the router. As WISPs, we're always walking a fine line because unlike the cable company, which has a monopoly on what it does, we're very rarely monopolies. We need to be able to offer good service because customers will switch on a whim. We need to retain them, make them happy.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to root out of you exactly. Being an operator, similar situation, I've got to know these things, like you mentioned about the moonworm, which I wasn't aware of previously. Appreciate you bringing that forward.
Oh yes, that was one where we did get a lot of press for early on for having discovered that, but it was brief and a lot of people may have missed it because it was a flash in the pan.
Mm-hmm.
But there are still many susceptible routers out there, and that worm is in fact still running around the net.
Hasn't been completely suppressed. Dennis, are you aware of the moonworm?
I've heard of it before. I don't really have anybody that used routers that, in that particular instance, had that problem. My only, like I said, I'm not trying to argue here. My thought as a WISP operator, though, is I would want to change my gear and be up to date. I don't want to. It would be as if I had like an old CB3 still out in the field. And there are other reasons besides the hardware. Does it work? Yes. There's other reasons to change that hardware in those instances. And I'm not sitting there stating that is the only reason. But that's it for me anyway. From a business perspective, I would sit there and say, let's change the gear, because changing the gear will get us to new technology, etc. And yes, it may work now, but now we get to more spectral efficiency. We can add more people on. There's other benefits other than that. Now, with that said, I understand, the home user in the customer service thing. Oh, you need to change the router, and people complain about it. I understand that. As I would mention to most of my customers, we typically do not recommend them putting in some type of consumer-grade device, such as Linksys, D-Link, things like that, if that's a product that you're going to be supporting in the future. I'm not saying that would have not had or prevented the issue, but I am just mentioning that is a alternative to those. So with that said, again, I understand the point and the comment that Brett made, which is, welding the hood shut is a perfectly good reason. We shouldn't allow them to take away those liberties. As like he said, what's next? They're going to start welding our hood shut. We can't bolt on speed parts just because we may be able to go faster. So I understand the point, but on the WISP side, I think it's not as much. It may affect your business more or less depending on how much of those types of systems you use, if that makes sense. And it sounds like Brett, he uses a lot of DDWRT. I have used it in the past, but typically I'm pulling out that type of gear. So again, I'm not saying it's bad by any means. It's just something that we would normally do. So, with that said, everybody has their own opinion and own comment, and I'm not saying his is not valid because it perfectly is. So,
And Brett, one more time, what was the FCC docket number one more time?
Okay, let me look this up again on my screen here.
It should be 15170 is what you said earlier.
Yes, that is. I'm verifying that. Yes, it is ET. So it's OET docket number 15-170, and is also proceeding number FCC proceeding number 15-92. And this is you can look this up on the electronic comment filing system. And again, this is I actually I agree with Dennis. I always want to try to keep on the cutting edge in terms of hardware, and we always try to do that. But I'm also very worried about what this might bode for the future. And I'm also very worried. I'm also a bit worried about becoming captive. I'm a little bit worried that if I can't update the firmware in something that the manufacturer just didn't provide a feature, or if the manufacturer went under, for that matter. I don't want to be stuck. So I'd like to maintain my options. I think that WIS should point out that we're not bad actors as a rule, and that we can be we can be trusted, I think, to to be good citizens here. I also think that the bad actors are very few and far between. We shouldn't be penalized. But again, that doesn't mean that I'm trying to keep antediluvian equipment going. I'm most certainly not. DDWRT is installable on. Usually, it takes about 2 or 3 months for it to be installable on the very latest gear. So we're not just talking about old gear here. We're talking about new stuff too.
There we go. Steve, do you have anything else? Because I think I got all the questions I got.
Yeah, I appreciate Brett for being on the show again. He's not a stranger to the show, and I appreciate him bringing this forward, because for me, I do sell consumer grade equipment because it works well on my network, but the problems that I see can manifest themselves, as Brett has obviously shown us. And I agree with Brett that do this and what's next. I mean, it's a slippery slope, just like Title II is a slippery slope for us.
Yeah.
Brett, you have any last comments before we wrap up the show? We appreciate you being on the show again.
Yes, well, thank you for having me. And I guess our only comment is that it is what we are seeing is is symptomatic of a general change in attitude in Washington D.C. With Title II, basically the FCC is giving itself license to micromanage everything in a way it has not tried doing in many decades, and this is another example too. I think we need to become more active. Before, I think that WISPs have been too slow to get involved in policy making. And I think that this is one example of a case where we can step forward and hopefully nip something in the bud. But we should keep pushing on Title II. We should keep pushing on spectrum policy, everything that affects us, because ultimately it's not just us. It's the public at large that's going to benefit if people are able to do the sorts of things we do.
And this is one of the reasons why we got ISP radios, because we want to be able to bring these issues and these topics, whether or not it is relevant to you, but it may be relevant to somebody else, and that's why we want all these topics to be brought up on ISP Radio, so that everybody can at least start the discussion. If you can't start the discussion, then you don't have any resolution to the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
absolutely.
and I hope that in the future we get more active on other issues, including internet, sales taxes on e-commerce, which are just on the horizon, and also the new service taxes, which have been proposed oddly enough, by many states and some cities on online services that run through our networks and could discourage use of the internet for those things. So there's a lot to cover. This is just the tip of the iceberg.
Excellent.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you, Brett, for coming on the show in short notice and sharing with us FCC docket ET 15170. I'm going to go look at it, and I'm also going to Google Moonworm with Linksys and see what I can do to help patch those holes. But again, thank you very much. Dennis, if you have anything else, I think we could wrap it up.
I am all good. I think we got everything I think we talked about everything we can.
Cool. Well, thanks a lot, folks, for listening. We appreciate it, and we will talk to you all next week. Have a great week.
Thank you for listening to ISP Radio. We hope you've gained new insights and additional wisdom in our industry as well as your business. Please remember to visit our show sponsors via the links on ispradio.com. If you're interested in becoming a show sponsor, contact us at sales@ispradio.com. Now go out there and push those packets as fast as you can. Good luck and Godspeed.